Research suggests that women are using generative AI much less than men. Why? Welcome to the Chicago Booth Review podcast, where we bring you groundbreaking academic research in a clear and straightforward way. I'm Hal Weitzman. Today, we're bringing you something we enjoyed so much we wanted to share it. It's from The Pie, a podcast from our friends at the Becker Friedman Institute for Economics at the University of Chicago. In this episode, host Tess Vigeland speaks with Chicago Booth's Anders Humlum, a labor economist, about the effect of generative AI on the workforce. Who will be the winners and losers from the AI revolution, and who's using the technology to make them more productive at work?
ChatGPT has been part of our lives for about a year and a half now. In many industries, it has the potential to make workers more productive. So who's adopting it, and why aren't more doing so?
If they see it as beneficial, are they then using it, or are there some other factors that are holding them back? So you could think of it, maybe they require some training before, maybe actually their employer are not allowing them. Maybe they fear that this technology will just make them redundant.
Welcome to The Pie. I'm your host, Tess Vigeland. Economists are always talking about the pie, how it grows and shrinks, how it's sliced, who gets the biggest share. In this show, we're talking about the most pressing matters of the day seen through the lens of economics. The Pie is a production of the University of Chicago's Becker Friedman Institute. And in this episode, we're checking up on ChatGPT, the generative AI platform that's been in widespread availability and use since late 2022. It's been billed as a potential boon to productivity in the workplace. So how's that going? Well, today we hear about research into some specific industries where ChatGPT could be a natural fit. We'll hear which workers are using it, how much, and why some are not.
My name is Anders Humlum. I'm an assistant professor of economics at the Booth School of Business here at the University of Chicago. And I love an apple pie.
Well, Anders, before we get to the research, I would love to hear your experience with ChatGPT. Do you use it? Do you find it helpful?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually do use it. But not for my core research. I find it very useful for smaller tasks, such as small coding tasks that I would sometimes spend a whole day on because I'm not a great coder. ChatGPT just helps speed up that process. So definitely computer programming is something I use ChatGPT for, I would say, almost every day.
You know, I remember reading probably, a year ago or so, several articles that said that versions of generative AI is going to change the world. Do you agree?
I think it's going to be a slow process. I think it's a historic event, to be honest, what has happened in the last year. That in particular, ChatGPT has been a game changer in the sense that now we have generative AI in the hands of so many people. And I think that was the genius part of ChatGPT, is that it was so easy to access. It's a free service. It's fairly easy to set up an account, and it's a chatbot. And I do think that's something that is huge. But I think these more dystopian or larger predictions about how it's going to make us all redundant, I don't subscribe to that viewpoint. And I think the process from people trying it out right now until it's actually being adopted and changing the way we work, I think this will take a lot of time.
Well, as someone who's in industry where they've said that it's going to be destroyed, I'm glad to hear you say that. Journalism, I think, is very vulnerable at this point. But so your study looks at who is adopting ChatGPT and why. What prompted you to launch the research?
So I'm interested in technology to begin with, and I'm interested in the implications for labor. So I'm a labor economist. I want to understand who's able to get a job at what wage. And technology is one of the most important determinants of that. And here we just have this technology that we've never seen before, where a year after its launch, it's really widely adopted by workers. So we want to understand just how many people are using it, who are using it, and for what purposes. Because I think that's really important both to understand what are the aggregate gains from this technology, like how much in terms of productivity can we expect from it, but also who's going to gain from this or who is potentially going to be losing out and not being able to share in the gains from this technology. So I think the first step to answer those questions is just to get some basic facts down on who's actually using it. And if there's differences in who's using it, what explains why one worker is using it and the other does not.
Okay, so you took a wide range of surveys in Denmark, right? So this is the Danish population that we're talking about. What kind of surveys were you looking at?
Yeah, so I worked together with Statistics Denmark, where we can survey basically the entire population. So we focused on 11 occupations that are exposed to ChatGPT. So these are jobs where writing text is a core part of the job. So you can think of it, jobs like software development, writing computer programs, as well as paralegals, for example, summarizing text, legal documents, or school teacher creating a syllabus. So we want to understand in these 11 occupations that we selected, first, who are using it, for what job tasks are they using it, and what do workers think about the technology? Do they perceive it as something that is very beneficial or something that is potentially a threat for them? And if they see it as beneficial, are they then using it, or are there some other factors that are holding them back? So you could think of it, maybe they require some training before, maybe actually their employer are not allowing them, maybe they fear that this technology will just make them redundant. So we want to understand those factors that are also potentially preventing workers from using the technology. And those were the core questions that our survey focused on.
Okay, well, let's go through those one by one. Give us a sense of the rate of adoption of ChatGPT, especially in the workplace. Who's using it and how much are they using it?
So I think that's the first core finding that comes out of this, is just how pervasive this technology is. We find that around a half of workers in these exposed occupations have used it. So they've tried it. So this use vary across occupations. So the highest adopters are software developers, where 79% of workers who are employed developing software, so computer programmers, they have tried ChatGPT. And then on the other side of the spectrum, financial advisors, around a third of these workers have used it at some point.
Would that be for things like investing?
So this could be, for example, preparing a financial plan, like a strategy. So I may have, as a client, some goals in terms of some target retirement savings, and I have maybe a risk profile that I want to obtain. And what the financial advisors can do is to summarize those goals, and then ChatGPT can help develop a plan in terms of what to invest in and how much to save on a monthly basis. So it's not everyone who've tried it who are actually actively using it. Here we find that it's more around a third to 40% that are actively using it. And then there are even less people who are kind of like the super users who are actually subscribing to a Plus account, which is the paid account. There it's around 6% who do that. So it's been in the hands of many people, but there is some variation in how many people who are actually like really actively using it.
All right. Well, you also broke all of that down into what kind of workers are using it. Can you talk us through some of the demographic findings that you have here?
Yeah. So I think that was another kind of shocking finding, at least for me, is that there's a huge gender gap in the use of ChatGPT. In particular, women are 20 percentage points less likely to have used ChatGPT compared to a man in their same occupation. You take two software developers, we can even look at co-workers, and that same 20 percentage gap remains. So that was not something I had anticipated going into this study, but that just seems like a very important fact right now for us to understand and try to think about how we can mitigate those gender differences in their adoption rates. Because if workers and female workers in particular are not using it, then they're not going to gain from it. That's for sure.
And from these survey results, you couldn't really see why, right?
So that's the next part of the survey is we actually do want to understand what drives these gender differences. And you could think of two classes of reasons. One could be that women just find it less useful. We actually don't find that's the case. Women are as optimistic about the time savings from ChatGPT as men are. But we find that women face stronger barriers to using ChatGPT. And in particular, they highlight that they need some initial training in how to use it before they can really take advantage of it. So they understand.
So the barrier is basically just a lack of knowledge.
It's, I guess, lack of knowledge. It's a good question why they say that they need some additional training. And I think there's some open questions there that we don't fully answer. It could be lack of knowledge. And they do say that they are less certain about their assessments of ChatGPT. We also asked them about their time savings from the technology. And women are more likely to say that they're less certain about it. But that uncertainty factor, that doesn't explain the whole gender gap at all. There's still a big remaining gap that I think this study takes the first steps to try to understand, but it's surely not the final word.
So there was a big gender gap. Any other demographic kind of interesting points that you had there?
Yeah, the second fact is that there's a strong tendency towards younger workers and less experienced workers using the ChatGPT. And that's something that we actually would have expected. So there's prior research showing that the people who have the most to gain from generative AI and ChatGPT in particular are those who have less experience. So you can think if you have less experience, for example, writing in a particular programming language, it's a huge help that ChatGPT can assist you with the specific syntax. Or if you are a new journalist, for example, you may take a lot of time writing the first draft, like converting some bullet points into a draft. And that's something that ChatGPT can help you with. Whereas if you're a seasoned journalist, that's something that you may be able to do much faster and better without the assistance from this technology. So we do see this also reflecting in the use, that it's the least experienced workers who have really adopted ChatGPT. That has led some prominent scholars to predict and hope that actually this could level the playing field within occupations and potentially decrease inequalities, because now I don't need a lot of expertise to be a fairly good programmer or text writer or journalist. But we actually find that it is workers who earned slightly more before ChatGPT was even invented that now are using it more.
Really?
And this reflects the fact that it's the higher achieving workers who have really jumped into this technology.
Yeah, they just want to learn something new, have a challenge?
Yeah, maybe. I think there's some personality type maybe, but we can also see that these workers have, for example, higher grades from high school. So I think that also shows that even though ChatGPT has the potential to decrease inequality, we don't see that showing up in the data right now.
That's so interesting. You also looked at what workers actually think about ChatGPT and its effect on their work and their productivity. What did the surveys tell you?
So we asked them first whether they think access to ChatGPT can help save time in their job tasks. And the first finding here is that workers are quite optimistic. In particular, workers say that ChatGPT can halve their working times in a third of the job task.
That's a significant number.
Yeah, that's huge. So that really means that there is some large productivity potential in this technology and can really transform potentially these occupations and really boost productivity. It's important to note that potential time savings are not equal to realized time savings. And that's where it's really important that workers are actually using it. And we see that there is a substantial fraction of workers who say they could save time, but are not actually using it right now. The second thing we asked them about is whether ChatGPT saves more time for a worker with greater expertise. And there, workers say that ChatGPT is mainly beneficial for workers who don't have a lot of expertise already. So this is really confirming this picture that the way that generative AI is boosting productivity is by helping the workers who are actually the least experienced and have the lowest expertise in the tasks.
And what about those who do start using ChatGPT for certain tasks? Do they keep using it? Do they find it helpful?
Yeah, so we find that it's around 2/3 to around 70% that have ever used it who are still using it. So they keep using it. And there's a tendency that it's the workers who are using it who are actually the most positive about the benefits of this technology. So this very bright picture that is being painted is mostly driven by workers who actually are using the technologies and understand what it can do for them. And they report that they are already saving time using it.
So then you looked at whether telling people about the benefits of ChatGPT would have some sort of impact on what they think of it, whether they use it. So this is a psychological experiment, right? And so what were you exploring there? Share those findings with us.
Yeah, so we ran an experiment where we informed workers about expert assessments of the benefits of ChatGPT in their job tasks. So for example, a school teacher, they may be able to save time using ChatGPT in creating a syllabus for a course. We informed a random set of our survey participants exactly about these expert assessments. And the question is here whether just by informing workers about the potential use cases of ChatGPT, can we change their minds? Can we actually convince some workers that there might be some time savings here from the technology? And if we can convince them, will that actually affect their use of ChatGPT?
And did it?
Yeah. So no. The short answer is that you can actually shift people's beliefs and opinions. So we do see that workers, after they're informed about these assessments from experts, they do update their beliefs and their assessments. And these effects persist. So we do a follow-up survey 2 weeks after, and they still have changed their minds. They understand that actually there's a set of tasks where they can save time from ChatGPT. But even though that they now understand these potential time savings, we don't find an effect on their actual use of the technology. So that raises a big puzzle potentially. And the explanation is that workers face substantial barriers from converting that information about the time savings into their actual use. And we highlight two key barriers that workers are reporting. And the first one is that there's a substantial fraction of workers who are not allowed to use ChatGPT by their employers.
That would definitely be a barrier.
Yeah. So informing them about the potential gains from this technology will not do anything for them if they're not allowed to use it in the workplace. The second key barrier is this need for some initial training. That those workers who now they understand from the expert assessments that they have a task where ChatGPT can help them. But they also say that in order for them to use it in this task, they would need some initial training, even though it's fairly easy to access. In order to really get the most out of this chatbot, they say that they need some initial training.
So what does all this tell you about the future of ChatGPT in the workplace, at least in these 11 industries that you looked at?
My conclusion is that there's a big role for firms in the future to facilitate and steer the further adoption of ChatGPT. It's very unique that this first part of the adoption process have really been driven by individual workers making the decision to try to use the technology.
Yeah, to give it a shot.
Give it a shot. And we don't see that with many other technologies. For example, with a welder at a car manufacturing plant, he can't just from one day to the other decide that now we want to...
He's going to weld.
that
he's going to use a new piece of equipment.
No, or like that his job is going to be automated by an industrial robot or something like that. It's very unique that we have this worker-driven adoption of an important production technology. But I think going forward, the power is going to shift back to the firms in helping workers and more workers use this technology. And I think there's two key reasons why I conclude that, is that the key barriers that workers are reporting, which is the need for training and restrictions on use, are both things that employers are well positioned to facilitate. So first, in terms of training, I can easily imagine, and we're already seeing this, that employers are now trying to facilitate training of workers in how to use ChatGPT. And one example is employers sending their employees on a one-day crash course in using ChatGPT. And then you could think of having policies such as, for the next coming weeks, we encourage you to use ChatGPT in order for you to build the habit of accessing this tool. So this is something, as an employer, you can have a firm-wide policy that we want to encourage this use.
It's pretty low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, and workers are reporting that there's large productivity gains to be gained from such a policy. So I do think employers are interested in reaping those gains and converting them into profits or growth or whatever their objective is. So to summarize, I do think firms will play an important role in the future to get even more workers. And in particular, I think firms could be helpful in helping more women use it, because they highlight this need for training, and that's something that employers can facilitate. And I think an employer-based training effort could also help the lower achieving workers also to reap their benefits from this technology, if we had a more coordinated effort to train workers across the board and not just letting the highest achieving workers drift away because they're the first one to adopt the technology.
All right. Well, all I can say, and I'll say this publicly, is that ChatGPT would be a terrible podcast host.
Yeah.
So can't let that happen.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Anders Humlum, thank you so much. It's been fascinating.
Thank you.
The Pie is a production of the Becker Friedman Institute for Economics and part of the University of Chicago Podcast Network. If you'd like to keep in touch with the latest economic research from the University of Chicago, you can visit bfi.uchicago.edu/subscribe. If you're getting a lot out of the important research shared on this show, there's another University of Chicago Podcast Network show you should check out. It's called Entitled, and it's about human rights. Co-hosted by lawyers and law school professors Claudia Flores and Tom Ginsberg, Entitled explores the stories around why rights matter and what's the matter with rights. Our theme music was composed by Story Mechanics, production assistance from the BFI Communications team. I'm Tess Vigeland, your host and executive producer. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
That's all from our friends at The Pie.
If you want to hear more, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Next week, we'll be back to the usual Chicago Booth Review podcast, hosted by me, Hal Weitzman. Thanks for listening. See you next week.